Welcome to the matchday preview with the Blue Room. This week it's Crystal Palace at home and what was definitely a bit of a 6 points. I think I am delighted to be joined by Dan Cook from HLTCO podcast. I got it right. There we go. How are you, Dan?
I'm all good, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, can't complain. I was going to say, are you enjoying a relatively football-free weekend? But I think the position we're both in, you're just obsessing about other teams' results. So like yesterday, I was quite happy that Liverpool won, which
Yeah,
really does
yeah.
me head in. And I'm probably going to be cheering on Man United later when they play Luton. And it's,
Well,
it's not a healthy position to be in, is it?
absolutely not. I mean, when Forest put the second goal in against West Ham, I have to say I was sitting there thinking, obviously you've got the Moyes out protests at the moment with West Ham fans, and I'm not suggesting I'm Moyes out myself because I'm not particularly invested either way, but I certainly felt a pang of frustration when that second Forest goal went in.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think that's a thing. Just to quickly pick up on David Moyes, obviously he was at Everton for years, and it seems a bit rum if Everton fans are sort of saying, "I can't believe West Ham fans want him out," but we kind of got to the same position, um, with him because it felt like we weren't going to get any further with him.
Hmm.
But I think the difference there is he's won a trophy with them, and I don't think clubs like ourselves, yourselves, West Ham can really look much higher than seventh, depressingly, can we, or sixth at a
Not really,
push?
no. Although I will always say that, I mean, obviously it's a very simplistic way of looking at things, but I often feel as though people do tend to distill the issues at other clubs when you're peering at it from the outside in
Hmm.
to a very basic level of analysis. And if you actually talk to West Ham fans, it's not that they necessarily expect trophies every year, European qualification. It's about feeling infused about the football that they're watching. And
Yeah.
that's a very difficult thing to quantify when you aren't living and breathing it every week. So I'm not suggesting I have like the ultimate sympathy for their fan base, but I do think it's more of a nuanced position than just we haven't won this week, so David Moyes is bad. If you see my point of view.
Yeah, I think as well. Like I think they've been like sort of wanting him out for a couple of seasons, and then he went and won a trophy.
Yeah,
So
there was
it's a
plenty
bit
of people
like,
that probably thought, this is set that back. But yeah, it's,
yeah,
it's a weird position to be in, I get.
it is. Just on that, then looking at both our clubs, we're both in a bit of a mess on and off the pitch, aren't we?
Yeah,
Really, I think. I
yeah.
mean, if you just want to go into you saying before we started recording what your weekend's been like as a Palace fan, because it's been turbulent, I think would be the word to use.
Well, without a doubt, yeah. I mean, it's been a very tricky period because, I mean, just to sort of give you a quick whistle stop tour of things, we lost 5-0 to Arsenal. There were protests in the away end, not necessarily against Roy Hodgson, about the club in general and a lack of perceived direction. I think plenty of people thought that the board would pull the trigger there and we would potentially get a change of manager. We went into a game against Brighton, obviously for us, our main rivals away from home. We ended up losing that 4-1. And in the middle of that game, despite the fact that Michael Olise had just come back from a hamstring issue, Roy Hodgson decided to put Michael on at half time when we were 3-0 down. There have been
Mm,
plenty of people that have said Palace fans would have been calling for his head had he not put him on in that position. But given the delicate nature of Michael's rehab from that hamstring issue and the fact that he is our best player from an attacking perspective and he's now out for a prolonged period of time, it sort of ratcheted up the level of frustration. There was then this attempt from the club to try and lure Kieran McKenna away from Ipswich mid-season, which ended up failing at the last hurdle. I think he got cold feet with an hour or two to go. And then we went into the game against Chelsea last week, Monday night as well, knowing that we were going to, replace Roy with somebody else. That ended up being, or is going to be, Oliver Glasner, as long as nothing goes wrong at the very final moment. But obviously, the news that broke in relation to Roy Hodgson's collapse at the training ground has sort of
mm.
sent everyone into a bit of a tailspin. But for me, and I dare say many other Crystal Palace fans, it's frustrating to see that there is this sort of narrative being spun at the moment where the club have somehow acted callously because of Roy Hodgson's age, as if he collapsed on a training ground and we rang Oliver Glasner up at that exact moment, when actually, the wheels have been in motion for the best part of 10 to 12 days across two different managers, and it's just horrendous timing. Optics wise, it
Yeah.
looks horrible, but at the same time, you can't really, I don't think, fault the club too much for trying to be forward thinking in trying to get a new manager in.
Yeah, I mean, I always got the impression that Hodgson was only meant to be there as sort of an interim for that one season. And
Yeah.
then he'd sort of like, so that season he kept you up. It was kind of like, would have been a golden handshake and brilliant. Thanks for that. And then they'll move on. But have the club sort of, do you think they've got complacent because he's done all right? Do you think they got a bit
I think
complacent and thought, well, he's going to stay, so we'll just keep him in?
It largely depends on your perspective on it, because obviously, to go back to the period when Roy Hodgson first came in on an interim basis, we had 10 games to go. I'm led to believe through people that I trust at the club that, it was a case of the players themselves asking for Roy Hodgson to come back at that particular point. He did a fantastic job.
Mhm.
We ended up beating Leicester in his first game back. We went to Leeds. I think we won that 5-0 or 5-1. Went to Southampton and scored three. And it was a real tidal wave of momentum. And I think the board, rightly or wrongly, they viewed him as the definition of a safe pair of hands. But obviously, when you are pretty much putting out a signal that you're going to tread water for the entirety of 12 months, it does leave the fan base feeling as though they are in a sense of limbo. And unfortunately, we've sort of reverted to type for the same sort of reasons that we parted ways with him in the first place. And obviously, his age, as much as you don't want to say it is a barrier, it has to be taken into account because he collapsed prior to a game against Aston Villa away from home a few months ago. He ended up sort of recovering and taking over again. But when it's happened a second time, I feel as though it's sort of taken out of our hands in terms of a managerial process. Because even if we'd won 15 on the spin, you can't put a 76-year-old man's health at risk by putting him on the touchline in a relegation battle. So, there have been plenty of people that are saying, well, you can't talk for Roy and maybe Roy wants to carry on. But aside from, the poor form that we've had, if it was any manager, you would be saying a change has got to come. You do also have to worry about the potential of his health taking another wrong turn. So there's a multitude of different issues that make it a very muddied picture at the moment.
Yeah, you do feel he is like the sort of fella who would be like, I'm not giving up on this because of my age.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
then there is a duty of care from like Palace as employers to
Yeah.
sort
It's
of
a very
say, do you know
difficult
what? It's not
situation.
it's not good for you.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, you read different things in the press, and you're not 100% sure whether or not it's true. But there is a suggestion that he has said, even though he knows Oliver Glasner is coming in as of Tuesday, that he would be happy to be there and part of the coaching staff tomorrow night. But we're all sort of thinking, just enjoy sitting at home. And it's a really that sounds really patronising, and I don't want it to come across in that way. But there is, like you said, a duty of care here that you don't want to see him push himself too far again. So it's a very difficult situation, and one that unfortunately you're always going to have different opinions on, depending on where you're coming at it from.
Yeah, and as you say, the optics don't look great because you sort
No.
of, you've been caught in this new manager when that happened. But what's just on the new fella coming in? Do you know much about him?
Well, look, I'm not going to pretend that I'm never one of those people. Even though I do this for a living, and I speak about the club every day, I would never pretend that I'd watched every kick of Oliver Glasner's time at Eintracht Frankfurt, or even when he was in Austria with his first employers. But at the same time, I obviously watched Eintracht Frankfurt sporadically throughout that run in which they went on to win the Europa League, because apart from anything else, they knocked out West Ham and Rangers on their route to winning it. And from everything that I've read, from everything that I've seen, he plays, from my perspective at least, quite a Palace style of play. It's something that people outside the club, they wouldn't necessarily get that strong a handle on, because I think, it's difficult to understand what Palace fans want. But we expect, counter-attacking football primarily, but playing with pace, playing with energy, playing with passion, and trying to break as quickly on teams as possible. And he certainly seems to do that. I won't go too into detail about it because your listeners aren't going to be necessarily that bothered. And obviously, it won't impact Monday night's game because he's not in the dugout. But it certainly feels like an interesting appointment for us, because we've been linked with other managers, Graham Potter amongst them, and I just don't feel as though his style of football would necessarily mesh particularly well with what Palace fans want and expect to see. There's the sort of, I call it airy fairy, but the trying to have 70% possession and knock it
Yeah.
round the back. Everyone thinks they want that until it's actually there. And I do think large swathes of our fan base would feel somewhat, a fish out of water experience watching that. Whereas Oliver Glasner feels like he is quite Palace in the way that he approaches things. So I'm genuinely quite positive going into it.
Yeah, I think that was the kind of football Frank de Boer played, wasn't it? Sort of.
Oh, I mean, he attempted to for
Well,
five
that's what I
games.
mean. Yeah, and it's it just doesn't work at some clubs. It's the same at Everton when Martinez was our manager. To be endless passing across the back, having loads of possession but not doing much with it, and it's not what like fans of Palace and Everton, they don't want to see that really. I
Apart
just
from
just
everything else, at the
just
moment, we are bang in the middle of a relegation battle. Points are of a
yeah
premium. This is Monday night. It's the definition of a 6-pointer. So even though, you can look at that and not write it off, but obviously he wouldn't be in to take that game anyway. We've got home games coming up against Luton and Burnley, two absolutely massive fixtures. And if you are experimenting with a style of football that the players aren't used to, you haven't really got that bedding in period to get, your feet under the table properly. So I'm mildly optimistic, but at the same time, best laid plans and all of that.
Yeah, just on to Monday night's game. Then I've got a good mate who's a Palace fan. He's a Homesdale ender,
Mm.
and basically it feels like we have very much the same outlook on our clubs. That basically, if something can go wrong, it probably will. So I'm
Yeah.
looking at the fixtures now. You've not won there since that game in 2014-15.
Yeah, I
And then
remember that.
I look at a run like that and I'm thinking, yeah, this is the one where they come and beat us again now. It's just that pessimism that you can't. It's just a natural thing, isn't it? It's just how you feel. How are you feeling about the game on Monday night?
Well, I'll be honest, it's difficult. If it sounds really callous, this, and again, I've come in for all sorts of stick from people saying, "Oh, you've sort of manifested this with Roy's illness and all the rest of it," because I've been saying for a few weeks that he needs to be replaced in terms of his actual role. But if we'd gone into it with Roy still in charge and no sign of a change, I'm not 100% sure we would have seen anything other than an Everton win. I get it from your perspective. You're at home, you always expect the worst. But from the outside point of view, and I said this to somebody else the other day, we are relatively recently a club that have been in administration ourselves. We got a 10-point deduction in 2010, and it had a real galvanizing effect on the entire club because you put petty squabbling to one side, and everyone has this goal in mind. You pick up your tools, as it were, and you all pull towards the same direction. And from the outside looking in, it feels as though Everton are in that sort of guise at the moment. And I feel like Sean Dyche is the right manager to guide you in that particular attempt. And from my point of view, a Monday night game under the floodlights at Goodison, with our recent record there, it just seems like the most obvious result in the world that Everton had turned us over. I go back to the game when Frank Lampard was in charge and we had a 2-0 lead and somehow managed to give that up. So I would love to think that we can go there and get something, but it's very difficult given the turmoil behind the scenes and the uncertainty over exactly what's going on with the managerial situations to think anything else, unfortunately.
Yeah, it feels like one that will somehow both lose to me. Um, yeah, just on that, I mean, the two clubs at the minute are quite similar, aren't they? There's a lot of unrest with what's going on with regards to ownership and people running the club. And also in the league, I mean, I'm just looking at the form guide here. We've not won for quite a few games. Our last six, we've lost two, drawn three. Sean Dyche has come under a bit of stick sometimes because I think it's maybe 1 in 10 or something that we've won. I'm not sure. I should have read up before and I should know this anyway. But it's if you take it in the context of the games we played, I think we played City twice in that, and we played Spurs twice as well.
Mm.
So I think we've got a relatively good run of games coming. You say a relatively good run. There's never a good run of games when you're 18th in the table.
Because
Every
they all
game's a
become
tough
six
game.
pointers by definition.
Yeah, yeah, basically. But I mean, you look at yourselves. It feels like you've sort of drifted towards the bottom a little bit. So you've won two. I think you beat Brentford, wasn't it?
We beat
And
Brentford and so we beat Brentford, but prior to that, the most recent victory was away at Burnley, I
right,
think, which it feels like about 10 years ago now. Uh,
yeah, you were unlucky against Chelsea as well. I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's if you actually look at the stats, I saw it come up on Sky Sports yesterday. I think only Sheffield United have conceded more goals than us in the last 15 minutes of games, and
Right.
that feeds into your psyche. So you'll go into a game like this tomorrow night, and if we are 0-0 with 5 minutes to go, it automatically, I can guarantee you, every Palace fan, and by definition, the players will think, "Here we go again."
Yeah.
Because the game against Chelsea, we're 1-0 up at half time. Everyone's feeling great. Come out for the second half, they score immediately. And even though we were well in the game for the second 45, there was always this sense of Groundhog Day. You expected it to come. And the fact that Conor Gallagher ended up getting the two goals that actually sealed the victory just puts the cherry on the cake, really.
Yeah, it was the most Palace thing ever. That wasn't it? That would happen. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's the same at Goodison as well. It's sort of when we go 1-0 down, no matter at what point in the game. So obviously that game against Man United where we had the protest and then we're 1-0 down from an absolute worldie within 30
Mm.
seconds. It knocked, oh no, about 2 minutes, sorry, wasn't it? It just knocked the wind out of us completely because you think, well, we've got to score two now. And where are the two goals coming from? Ultimately you get beat 3-0 in that game. But it it is strange, isn't it? Because you do have that sort of collective groan at that point. So I know what you mean. You're in the game, 75 minutes comes along, and then you start getting a bit twitchy, thinking, yeah, we're no good at this point here. And I think that does translate to the players, but it's so hard to overcome as a fan because it's a bit of a visceral feeling, isn't it? You can't
Yeah.
control it. It
And for
it, it
me,
is a real feel of dread, like feeling of dread.
with Roy Hodgson as well, again, I appreciate the man's been ill in hospital, but if you're going to be constructive and realistic in a conversation about the football side of things, he is pragmatism. He is
Mm,
someone that will always look to shut up shop in the closing stages of games if you have something to hold on to. And that, if it works, is great. But if you go on a bad run of form, he set us up defensively against Arsenal and we conceded within 2 or 3 minutes from a corner. He set us up defensively against Brighton. We conceded after 2 or 3 minutes from a corner. And you're automatically behind, but without the tools to actually go ahead and try and, get an equaliser, get a goal to get in front because you've set yourself up to be defensively solid in the first place. So it puts everyone in a mindset of, well, where do we go from here? And that in itself is a legitimate reason why many Palace fans felt it was the right thing to do to make the call as a replacement many weeks ago, which is why I've got such a bee in my bonnet about people saying there's a lack of respect to Roy Hodgson, because this isn't some knee-jerk thing. This is a fan base that have gradually watched us drift towards potential relegation. And if we do go down after a decade in the Premier League, when, with all due respect to Luton and Burnley and Sheffield United, and indeed yourselves with a 10-point deduction, it would be a real aberration for us to actually fall through the trapdoor in this particular campaign.
yeah, it would as well. And sort of talking about, setting up defensively, I think with the attacking talent that Palace have got,
Mm.
I don't know, it feels like you should be going more, like you say, counter-attacking football. It's not for everyone, but I love to see an Everton team like hitting other teams on the break. I
Got to
find that
pick
the most
get
exciting thing.
tackling,
You
and then
defend
three
it,
or
you
four
get up the
people
pitch.
bomb forward. That's what we
Yeah,
want. That's what
yeah,
we've always wanted. So it's difficult when you don't get it, but yeah, we know.
yeah. But on the game on Monday night, then I think you're missing Gue,
We're
Eze,
missing
Elise,
Gay, Eze,
and Decore.
Elise, Decore, and well, so Joel Ward and Nathaniel Klein are both out, but Munoz has come in from Belgium. He will, I assume, continue. There is the bright spot of Adam Wharton, who came in for his first start against Chelsea. Looked absolutely fantastic to me. Another great pickup for us from the Championship. There is the potential that Matthias França gets another start as well. If your listeners aren't aware, he's someone who arrived from Brazil over the summer. It was his first start in the Premier League against Chelsea, which is another bone of contention for Palace fans because you've got a youngster there with all this potential, albeit he is a bit of a rough diamond, and we've never really seen him get the opportunity to prove it or not prove it, as it were.
Yeah.
So there are, talents bubbling around under the surface, but without those four key players, Decore, Eze, Elise, and Gay, it is a real uphill struggle from the very first kick, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does make it a lot harder, doesn't it? I think particularly because Everton are pretty mean in defence as well. So
Mm.
without those attacking players, it feels like Palace's job is even harder. We have played out two of possibly the most forgettable FA Cup games ever. I think recently, I was down at Palace for that game. I had a great time there, loved it, but the game was terrible, wasn't it? It was
If
like
it weren't for the red card, there would have been nothing to talk about.
nothing at all, but there absolutely nothing happened apart from that, really. And then the replay was, it took a set piece from Everton to win it, and I think we haven't scored a direct free kick for about 4 years. So I
It
sort of
was
summed
funny.
up
It
those
was
two
funny
games
my
there.
experience of that because in the Premier League in 2024, we won't tell how we do it, but everyone knows you can get all the streams and everything else. There was nothing. It was like going back to the
I
1980s.
wasn't on anywhere, was it?
It was nowhere. Like there were people saying to me, "There's got to be a link," and I'm like, "I'm telling you, it wasn't even." There was radio commentary. But I use an app called FootMob, right? And it's got like an old school Championship manager thing where the passes get pinged. They didn't even have that. I was sitting there like, what's going on in this game? So it was inevitability that we would lose in that fashion, and we wouldn't know anything about it unless you were there. Unfortunately,
And yeah, well, I wasn't at that game, so I was traveling back up from London, from work, and I don't think I've ever been so happy to be sat on a warm train and not in a freezing cold Goodison. And the weird thing about that game as well is I don't know if you've noticed when you've been to Goodison, but there's no phone signal at all. You
no,
can't get any phone signal.
same
But
as
for that,
Sellers. To be fair.
yeah, but for that game, loads of people were like tweeting out pictures. footage of the goal from the ground.
Were they?
Yeah, it was weird.
Funny,
It
isn't
was
it?
like it's sort of, I don't know, a multiverse thing. It's like it never really happened for me, but
Like
it
they'll let
kind
them
of
do
did.
it because it's not on anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that was it. Yeah. Um, we'll just wrap up then. What are your thoughts for the game on Monday? Obviously, as we said, it's a 6-pointer for both. Everton have got the decision apparently on the points deduction next week. People have been throwing around figures that we're going to get 4 points back, we're going to get 5, we're going to get 6. I don't think anybody really knows. I doubt the Premier League even know at this point what they're going to do. But I think Everton fans have just got to take it that we're 10 points down. We could still be 10 points down. We can't rely on the Premier League to give us any points back to help ourselves out. So this is a massive game. What are your sort of overriding thoughts of how it will go?
Uh, as much as it sounds miserable, I just can't unless the players. I mean, the thing is that there is a genuine affection for Roy Hodgson. It's not as though the players have sort of down tools
Yeah,
because they are anti him on an individual level. There is a great deal of respect. There is a great deal of time for him amongst the squad. And there are numerous reports that plenty of players were visibly shaken by the incident in which he collapsed. So I'm hoping that, as a final farewell to him, we put in an absolutely barnstorming display and managed to get 3 points. But it's one of those things where you've spent so much of this season watching football that has not inspired that you can't really expect it. But at the same time, I will never come onto an opposition preview like this and predict us to lose. So I'll have
yeah,
to go with a 1-1 draw, I think.
yeah. That seems fair enough. I think for myself, yeah, it's sort of you cling on to those things, don't you? Like the fact that for yourself that the whole Roy Hodgson being in hospital, the players are shaken by it, that could galvanize them to sort of
Mm,
like, put in a good display. Whereas if that hadn't happened and if he was on the touchline, like you say, it could just be another sort of
dry
dour
performance,
performance
yeah.
where,
I mean, don't
it
get me
just,
wrong, there's no guarantee there is going to be a raise in the
oh
performance.
yeah, yeah, of
Would
course.
like to hope that it's a sort of final push over the line, as it were, to sort of say thanks for everything. Because as far as I'm aware, come Tuesday, he is going to no longer be our manager, having mutually agreed to step down. So it is the perfect opportunity for us to put in, a final show of respect for him, and I hope that is the case.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm just hoping that our misfiring strikers finally score.
Well, if you're going to come up against any club where that's going to happen, it will be us. So
Exactly. And if you've got any misfiring strikers yourself,
we've
put
got
them on
plenty.
tomorrow because
We've got plenty. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, as I said, again, we probably both lose, but we'll see. Um, Appreciate that, Dan. Thanks for
No
coming
worries.
on. Best of luck to Palace for the rest of the season. As I said, I've got a really good mate who's a Palace fan, so I do like Palace.
Hopefully, it doesn't come out to a straight shootout between the two of us for who gets that third relegation
Oh
spot.
yeah, I couldn't cope with that. Yeah,
We
just,
will see.
but yeah, let's just hope football's the winner tomorrow night, eh?
With another nil-nil draw that no one's.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yes, I would not put it past us. Cheers, Dan. Thanks for
No
that.
worries.
We'll be back all this week with the usual weekly, subs weekly mailbag. I've got another old new borrow blue coming up this week. So stay tuned to the Blue Room and enjoy the game tomorrow night, wherever you're watching it. Up the toffees.